Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session today. I'll give everyone a minute to get in and get settled. You can take a moment to grab a piece of paper and a pencil if you want to take
Mhm.
some notes. But this session is also being recorded, so don't worry if you can't note down everything. You can watch the replay back and see if there's anything that you missed. We'll get started in just a minute because we have a lot of really exciting information to go over. And I would love it if everyone could introduce themselves in the chat box. Make sure you have it set to everyone so that everyone can see who we have here with us today in this session. And just let us know where you're calling in from and maybe your human design type. My name is Lindsay. I am head of community and events at Outsite, which is a global co-living and co-working company. We have about 50 locations worldwide in the US, Latin America, Europe, Asia, and Africa. And we also offer community events, perks for digital nomads, remote workers, creatives, entrepreneurs, freelancers, and anyone who's interested in that type of lifestyle. And I am a projector. So I see some people are introducing themselves in the chat. Thank you so much. Laura calling in from Miami, a manifesting generator. Ruth, another manifesting generator calling in from Amsterdam. It's so nice to see some familiar names on the attendees list. Hi again, Annie. It's good to have you here. Laura, Ruth, thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. You can go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat. Natalie is calling in from London, a generator with emotional authority. Annie, my fellow projector from Sydney. And Jess, what is your human design type?
I see someone in the chat, so they're a 6-2 generator. I am also a 6-2 generator, and I have sacral authority.
Awesome. All right, so this is a follow-up to a session that we did previously. There was a link to watch back the first session in the event information. Don't worry if you didn't watch that back. We will briefly go over some of the information that was presented in that one. You don't need to know exactly everything, but it is helpful to perhaps have seen that or have some understanding. Jess will give a kind of brief summary of the information that was covered in the first session, but this is kind of a follow-up to that. But it's okay if you want to listen along and then maybe watch the first one back after. Just be aware that we will quickly go over kind of the basics, and then we're going to dive a little bit further into the hooks, if I'm correct, for exploring your strengths and taking action. So it looks like we've got some more people saying hi in the chat. A manifesting generator from Paris, another manifesting generator. We've got a lot of manifesting generators here, which is awesome. Awesome. Okay, with that, again, thanks for joining us. Jess, thanks for taking the time out of your day to share all this information with us. And I'm going to turn it over to Jess now, and we're going to get started. But just one brief housekeeping item. The chat box is open if you have any comments or want to chat in the chat box, totally fine. I also have the Q&A box open, and we will save some time for questions at the end. The best place to put your question if you want to have your question answered in the Q&A at the end is in the Q&A box. Others can upvote or comment, and so that way we can make sure that we get to the most pertinent questions. But I'll also check out the chat box, and we'll be following along in the chat box during the session. So feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box if you want them answered at the end, or the chat box if you have kind of just a comment as we're going along through. Okay, no more from me. Let's get to what we came here for. Jess, happy to have you on.
Yes, thank you. I'm happy to be here. It was so fun to be here a couple months ago. And today is the part 2. So I'm going to dive right in. In part 1, well, the intentions today are to really explore what are some of the strengths. Last time we talked about what your strengths are in relation to your type, like if you're a generator, a manifesting generator, and we also talked about the way you make decisions. And today we're really going to focus on the centers in your human design chart. There's 9 of them. And this can really give you some clues as to what some of your strengths are and where you can get more easily pulled off track. Because like a lot of things in life, there is a wisdom in certain expressions of an energy, and then there are also kind of more like shadow expressions. And so we're kind of going to be exploring like both sides of that coin in the different centers. And please, your questions are encouraged. I'm somebody that really enjoys questions as a presenter. It helps kind of pull out more information. So as Lindsay said, please put your questions in the Q&A box. And so here's just a brief review of the lingo from last time. So how you feel your best and take aligned action, that's based on your type and your strategy in human design. The way you make decisions is in human design, what's called your authority. And today we're talking about the centers, which are what I like to call your strengths and your hooks. And here's just like a quick review of the 5 different types in human design. And you can see there's a percentage here, going from kind of, we'll call it the most common to the least common, which reflectors are only about like 1% of the population, for example. And if you don't know, I think Nina said she was like brand new to this topic. So if you've never looked up your human design chart before and you're joining us today, or if you don't remember, this is a link you can go to and you can pull up your human design chart that you can follow along with as we're talking today. Okay, so we're going to get right in. So you might be wondering, what are the centers, Jess? And so this little graphic here, as some of you have probably seen your chart before, there are these like different shapes. And these are the 9 different centers in your chart. And unless you're a reflector, most people are going to have some of these centers, what we call colored in, and some of the centers are white. And so what we're focusing on today is I'm going to talk about each of the 9 centers, but my focus is going to be on talking about the centers from the perspective of openness. So not from the perspective of if you have it defined. And so you can just take a minute to kind of notice now, how many centers in your chart do you have that are white, and how many do you have that are colored in? And so we're going to go center by center. And so the first one that we're starting with is the head center, which as I go through each center, you'll see the one circled that we're talking about, so you can follow along if you're a visual person. And before I talk about the specifics of the head center, I just wanted to give a little more information. So when you have a center that's open, how you can really think about this is you don't have a fixed way of being in this place. So for example, comparatively, if you are a generator, you have a defined gut. That's what makes you a generator or a manifesting generator. So you have this like specific way that your energy works in that center. But when you have a center that's white, that's open, what you really have is this multitude of possibilities that exists within you, because sometimes you might have this expression, or sometimes you might have that expression. So there's so many opportunities. So I think that's one way to really see those strengths within you, is that there's not one specific way to be. Now, on the flip side, because there's not one specific way that you are operating in that place, you can, what I like to call, get hooked into kind of operating in a way that's maybe just like somebody else, that isn't really your kind of natural way of being. So that's what we're going to focus on today. So when you have the head center open in your chart, what this center represents is inspiration and ideas. So with it open, you can get inspired just by taking a walk outside. So it's almost like there's always kind of inspiration dropping in. And so what can happen when you have this center open is you can get a little almost like overwhelmed by all the ideas you have. So if you're somebody that resonates with having a little bit of like anxiety, this could be that feeling of like, oh, I just like don't know where to get started. So especially in your business or your work, you might have like 50 ideas and you're like, I don't know which idea to sort of tackle first. So here are some things that can be helpful. To create a list at the start of your day to really prioritize your focus. Yes, and this is like I was saying, because you can be pulled in so many different directions. And it's kind of reminding yourself too that one of your zones of genius is having all these different ideas, but you don't actually have to act on all of them. So, sometimes, like, let's say you're a manifester, you might have 50 ideas, but then as you sit with it, there's only one idea you actually get an urge to take action on. And something else that I think is really important to explore is what helps you clear your head? Like, what is your way? So for me, I have an open head center, and it really helps me to go on a walk, to listen to music, and that sort of like clears my head. And something else I've also learned to pay attention to is the signs my body is given me when I've like consumed enough information. So I get this feeling of being tired behind my eyes. And that's a signal to me of like, okay, no more podcasts, no more books. Like I need to take a little break for the rest of the day and just kind of process what I've taken in. All right, so that's the head center. Lindsay, are there any questions popping up in the chat about the head center?
I haven't seen any yet, but we can
Okay,
go on to the next one. And if anyone has any questions
perfect.
after hearing both sides, then we'll answer.
Okay, great. And we can always come back at the end. All right. So the next center we have is the next one down, which is the mind. And so, like I was saying, the head is inspiration and ideas, and then the mind is where you actually kind of take take that inspiration ideas and you process it. And this is where opinions are formed. And what's really interesting is that people who have an open mind, your your zone of genius is actually not in holding tightly to one specific opinion. So for you, it can actually kind of pull you off track if you are trying to be certain and trying to like hold really tightly to like the right point of view. Because for you, your genius is in looking at a situation and being able to say, well, this could be true, or that could be true. We actually don't know. And so here's different ways we could approach this situation. So again, in work or business, you actually can bring that energy to a team by sort of helping people see things from different perspectives. So one of the reflection questions is kind of noticing where in your life are you maybe like forcing yourself to be certain, and what would it feel like if you could let that go and kind of embrace different viewpoints. The other thing that I've experienced from working with a lot of different clients is being able to notice like the way that you were raised or different environments you've been in. If you have an open mind, you might have sort of picked up other people's opinions, and you might not sometimes realize that it's actually not your opinion. So it can be helpful to almost shake things up a little bit. And sometimes when you notice yourself saying like, oh, well, this is the way I have to do X, or I'm supposed to operate this way in the world, maybe just stopping and being like, wait, is that actually true? Do I believe that? Or is that just how someone else told me I'm supposed to be? And that actually doesn't feel right for me. And I think especially right now in our world, I notice there's so much information from so many different places of like, well, this is the type of diet you're supposed to follow, or this is the best way that you should work out. So we're sort of always surrounded by these ways that people are saying you have to operate. So it can just be really helpful to be like, wait, And going back to our first session, going back to your own inner authority and be like, what feels true for me? Because connecting back to that authority, this is a great example of how often we try to make decisions from a logical place and from our mind. And that's where we get hooked out of that inner authority. All right, let's see. It looks like I don't get the difference between the white and colored numbers. Um, you don't understand let's see, I think it's Sarah. You don't understand the difference between the white centers and the colored centers?
That's what I'm guessing, or maybe it's the I'll let that person follow up with some more information, but it also does look like maybe there's some numbers inside of each center.
Oh, my internet. Yeah, so the difference is when, like, let's say somebody, like I, for example, have a defined mind. So for me, I can see things from many different perspectives, but it's actually, we'll call it like energetically correct, or actually really, it's one of my zones of genius to share a specific viewpoint and to have a specific opinion. So that's something that actually feels really good to me. And in a way, it's like, in my work, people seek me out for my opinions and for the way that I see things. So it's like I have a more specific fixed way of being in my mind, where people, again, who have this center open, it's like they might not necessarily um, want to spend their energy on sort of like cultivating specific opinions. Let's see. Annie says, can you unpack more around the amount of open versus closed? If you have more open centers, does it mean? Yeah, so if you have a lot of open centers in your design, the energy that I'm talking about today in each center, then a lot of that might resonate with you. The gates are something that are different. Oh, if you might be talking about if you just have one gate in a specific open center. Annie, I'm going to ask you for that second part of your question where you're talking about gates, maybe provide a little bit more information and put that in the Q&A box, because that would be a great question for me to come back to at the end, because that's like a little bit more specific. If you have more open centers. Yeah, so different people have different combinations. And so if you have more open centers, you could think about this in general, that, like I was saying, if you have an open center, you don't have like a fixed way of being in that place. So in some ways you have more like flexibility and openness with how you see the world, where you can also think about it too as when you have open centers, you are sort of open to receiving like um, other people's ways of being from the outside world. So it's sort of like you're going around tasting things and you have this openness to tasting and experiencing different ways of being. Whereas I have a client who has almost every center defined, and her energy has this very specific frequency. And so the way she sort of operates, she really has a lot of impact on the people in the room because she has very specific ways of being. And so it's not that if you have a lot of open centers, you don't have an impact, but it's like the way that your impact operates in the world just feels different. So it's like what our zones of genius are and how they operate. Yeah, and so this is so great. I love how people are asking such specific questions. So I think it's Lou Lee. Would you put that question, if when we're getting into gates and talking about defined and open centers, those are really great questions for me to come back to at the end. So pop that in the Q&A. Okay, awesome. So, okay, so we were just talking about the mind and really noticing if you have the center open. where in your life you are really maybe just giving a lot of energy away to feeling like you need to be certain about things. And okay, so next we have the throat center. And so if you have, in this example I have here, it's colored in, but again, this is if you have it, the throat center white. And about 20-ish% of the population have an open throat. So many more people in the world have a defined throat. And so a really great example of somebody that has an open throat is Oprah. And you might think, whoa, how does Oprah have an open throat? You know, she is like has made her living as a host and like interviewing people and has a lot to say. And what's really interesting is when you watch her interact with people, she has this way of listening to people and reflecting back their truth to them and what she hears them say to ask really powerful questions. So sometimes when you have an open throat, you might feel, especially like if you're in a group of friends or if you're at a meeting at work, sometimes you might be in more of the shadow expression where you feel pressure to sort of like speak up and fill the space and fill the silence. So some people with an open throat might feel really uncomfortable in that energy. And I've also worked with a lot of clients who feel more comfortable with the space and they're more in the wisdom of it, where they really sit back and listen and they trust that when they have something to say, someone will invite them into the conversation or they will speak up. So they're sort of comfortable and they're not sort of like run by the pressure and feeling like they need to fill the space. And so again, with this open throat, one of your gifts is that you are a really, really powerful listener. And something that people with an open throat, that it's really helpful to play with is there can be this feeling like you need to plan what you're going to say, because if you don't know what you're going to say, it's like hard for you to trust that you'll know in the moment. But again, it's actually what makes you genius is like trusting that what you're meant to say in the moment is going to come to you when you open your mouth. So can you get more comfortable speaking from that place of trust instead of feeling like you need to almost like rehearse and have a plan for what you're going to say? Okay. So next, let me just clear this out. Okay. So next we have another really fun center to talk about. And this center is called the G Center, and it's related to your identity. And it's really about your direction in life and also the environment. And so when you have this center open, you can actually be quite sensitive to your physical space. So it's really helpful for you to be high maintenance about your space. So, you know, where does your desk need to be? Where, like what colors do you like in the room? If you're going out to eat, maybe you have like a specific place in the restaurant that it feels comfortable for you to sit. So it's actually healthy for you to be, I'll call it like a little bit Goldilocks and specific about what environments feel right for you. I recently heard someone who travels often with an open G center, and she was talking about that. A lot of times she will like research ahead of time the restaurants or the places she wants to go, because that really helps her feel more comfortable when she's visiting a new space. And so this is also related to people. So you can enjoy connecting with many different types of people. And again, part of your genius is kind of like the mind where we were talking about it's more about being flexible and seeing things from different points of view. You can be a little bit of a chameleon. So when you're with friends that are funny, it can like bring out your funny side. When you're with people who are serious, it can bring out your serious side. So instead of almost figuring out like, who am I? The better question for you is like, who do I want to be today? And like almost thinking about yourself as a little bit more of like an actor or actress, and that different environments and different people bring out different parts of your personality. And so for you, kind of limiting yourself and being like, this is who I am, that can actually not feel good to you because your identity is like more flexible. And so it also might resonate with you to almost think of your life too in different seasons. Like maybe there's a season where one part of your personality comes out more, or you dress a certain way or wear a certain color lipstick. And then all of a sudden, 3 years later, you cut your hair and totally change your style. So these are some of the things that can be quite common for people with an open G center to sort of play with the way that they look or the way that they present themselves. And so a really helpful question is like, do you give yourself permission to evolve and change? Or are you keeping yourself in a box? And there's actually a funny meme because apparently Brad Pitt has an open G center. And so there was this funny meme where it showed him in different relationships and how in each relationship he ended up kind of resembling the person that he was dating. And yeah, so this is just another great example of how it's like healthy for you to be flexible in this way, because sometimes where I was talking about mentioning that this can be a hook is like you can like live your life in this way where you're constantly asking yourself this question like, well, what's my purpose? Like, what do I need to do to find my purpose? And for you, it goes back to, again, checking in with that inner authority you have and letting that guide you, as opposed to trying to constantly figure it out. Because when you listen to your authority, it's like your direction will be revealed, your purpose will be revealed. Just checking the Q&A box here. Okay, awesome. It looks like, oh, let me check the chat. Oh, okay. Helen is just saying this makes so much sense. I have an open G center, and environment and aesthetics are so important to me. And so when you have a defined throat, again, it's like you have this specific point of view, the specific energy that your voice is communicating that is fixed and always present. So that's different than somebody that sort of almost in a way taps into these many different expressions. So there's a lot of singers, for example, who have an open throat because they can like sound very different in different ways. And at the same time, there's many singers with a defined throat. And so it's kind of fun, for example, like thinking about different musicians and noticing, oh, this person's music always kind of has this specific way that the musician sounds, where like, oh, this musician has these many different ways that their voice has sounded over time. So again, it's like they're both valuable and they both have strengths. And so it's like understanding how that strength operates in you. Okay, this is one of my favorite ones to talk about because this is one of the centers that was most transformative in my journey. And so some people will call this the ego center. Some people call it the heart center. They both mean the same thing. And so this is all about your capacity to commit and value. And about 70% of the world actually has an open ego. And so kind of a lot of what we see playing out in the world is actually this shadow of the undefined ego and people feeling like they need to prove themselves and they need to prove their value. And I feel like this, for a lot of people, is deeply connected to burnout. So I mentioned that I'm a generator, and so I'm going to explain how this also links to my way of making decisions. And as a generator, who my way of making decisions is listening to my gut. And so for me, when I realized this, I started tuning into my gut and noticing that sometimes I was saying yes to things, but it actually wasn't really a true yes for me. What was happening is that I was so used to saying yes and had a little bit of energy of being a people pleaser that was coming from this undefined ego, that I was like saying yes to prove what a good friend I was, to prove what a good daughter I was, to prove that, you know, I was the best leader in my job because I was always the one that people could go to and I was reliable. So in a way, I wasn't really being authentic because I was saying yes in a way. It's a little bit hard to describe, but a little bit of this give to get energy. So it really wasn't this true heart-centered energy of like, oh, I would love to help you, um, you know, with this thing you have going on. Instead, it was like, oh yeah, I'll help you. And then, you know, you're going to appreciate me and tell me what a good friend I am. So it's really interesting, like if you have in some aspect of your life, like let's say at work or in a personal relationship where you don't feel appreciated or don't feel seen, a way that you can actually take responsibility for this is to actually think about, in this dynamic with this person, is there actually resentment showing up because I'm doing things I don't really want to be doing? And so almost like I'm not giving this person an opportunity to appreciate me because it's not coming from a genuine place. And so what would happen if I only said yes when I meant it? And would that shift the dynamic at all? Um, so yeah, so I thought I would just share this kind of little example here, and hopefully it resonates with some people. Because with this open ego, the tendency is to over compromise and overcommit. And so it's really important, again, to just notice where that yes is coming from and what's your relationship with saying no? Like, what would it be like to say no when you want to say no? And how could you build more trust with yourself and more trust with your inner way of making decisions by really listening to that? Let me just look at the chat here. Okay, open ego, so relatable. Great. And one of the big gifts of the open ego is that you have this relationship with truth, and you can kind of tell when somebody's bullshitting you and when they're not coming from like a true place. So again, when you have a center that's open, it's like you can also really have this sense of who's being authentic in that center. Okay, so the next one we have is connected to emotions and emotional energy. And for this center, it's about 50-50. So 50% of the population has this center open. And sometimes it's interesting, people with this center open, your natural way of being is actually cool, calm, and collected. Whereas people with an emotional wave, their energy sort of more naturally spikes up and can come down, and they have this connection with their emotional wave. For you, your natural state is cool, calm, and collected. But for a lot of people who have this center open, they can actually feel sometimes like highly sensitive and highly emotional. And that's because you're actually tapped into the emotions of the people around you. And so it's really important to, I love the sayings like observe, don't absorb. So can you actually notice when you're walking around and you're feeling pretty chill and all of a sudden, maybe you notice this like, oh my gosh, why do I feel so sad? Or why do I feel so angry all of a sudden? And being like, oh, I was just talking to that friend who's going through a divorce, and I sort of like just took that emotional energy for them. And I actually don't need to process that because that's mine to release. And in personal relationships, or even in like a business context, sometimes what can happen is you don't want to rock the boat because you almost don't want to feel someone's reaction, for example, to you saying no. So instead, you just kind of avoid conflict or avoid the situation. So it's really important to notice when you're avoiding something, and can you give yourself permission to speak up and like not take on the other person's emotional reaction. Yeah, so this is a really big one. And then also taking space if you need it to kind of come back to your own energy if you're around a lot of people. And I also call this center, when people talk about being an empath, kind of the classic empathing center that people think of kind of like taking on other people's emotions. Okay, so next we have the gut. And this is a really big one if you are a projector, a reflector, or a manifester, because we know that about 70% of the world are generators and manifesting generators, and they all have a defined gut. So you having this center open, it's like a lot of the world is operating with this like consistent 9 to 5, I'm gonna go, go, go energy. And that's not the way, that's not your relationship with this center. So for you, it's really important to know when is enough enough, and how can you be wise about like when to act and when to be chill. And are there certain relationships or certain like spheres of your life, like work or maybe with family, where you continually push past your limits and then you notice yourself feeling burnt out? And I had a client once who just talked about, even she would notice going out, she would be trying to like keep up with how much other people were drinking. Or it could also look like going to a workout class and trying to keep up with the intensity of the way other people are working out. So it's like, can you give yourself permission to obviously live your life and go to spaces you want to be in, but not need to maybe do it the same way somebody else is doing it? Okay. Next, we have, and for each of these centers, I also just want to say, I could talk about each center for hours. So I'm giving you just like a little bit of a tiny taste. And in your own personal designs, the way that the centers are connected, for example, like one center connected to another center, um, all of this like plays into the flow of energy in your personal design. So there's so many more details you can get into. So this is like a very brief overview. Okay, so the next one we have is the root center. This one for me personally was also another place of a lot of like lessons and wisdom over the years. And the root center, like I was talking about at the beginning, the head center, and this is a place of where mental anxiety can show up. The root center is more of this place of like physical anxiety. And so what I mean by that is like when you think about adrenaline, like that kind of like coursing through your veins, that's that root center energy. So people with a defined root tend to have this like physical way that they like process stress. So for example, they might feel really great like going to run a 5K because they have this way that they move that adrenaline through their body, and they might feel really good like working under deadlines or working under pressure. So when you have an open root, I want to be clear, it's not that you can't work under pressure, because you can sometimes, but your like natural habitat and most natural way of being isn't to work under pressure 24/7, because that's how you can kind of like lead to adrenal fatigue or like burn yourself out. So what's important for you to notice is, like I was just saying, you can be fast when you want to be fast. But what is urgent and worth prioritizing? Because sometimes what it can feel like with an open route is that everything is an emergency and everything is urgent and worth prioritizing. So this could especially play out in the workplace, where maybe you're constantly working late because you feel like you need to get everything done. And people with an open route often have this feeling of like you want to cross everything off your to-do list, or you want to empty your email inbox. But the sort of cosmic joke is that once you cross everything off your to-do list, like a new item is going to pop on. So there's never going to be this feeling of like, oh, everything's done. Now I can rest and relax. So part of my journey has been with this open route is, oh, like, even though I have 5 more things I want to do today, I can still stop and have a cup of tea right now and take 20 minutes to chill out, and those other things will still be there. They're actually not an emergency. There's not a tiger that's chasing me, so I can stop and relax for a minute. Um, and so again, the wisdom here is you can be really wise about timing and what to prioritize. And I love that saying, you can't miss what's meant for you, because I've noticed that when again, my way of making decisions is listening to my gut. But when this root center comes into play and I feel like I need to like hurry up, or like I don't have time to make a decision, um, when I've made decisions from a pressurized place, they've like never turned out well because that's not my way of moving through the world. So whenever I feel that kind of like pressure, actually I had something funny happen recently where I was trying to decide about a trip I wanted to take, and I was about to purchase plane tickets, and I was like, you know what? I feel like I'm putting pressure on myself to make this decision, and I just don't feel clear about it yet. So I ended up waiting a few days, and then this consulting job I have actually asked me to go do a job in that same place at the same time I was going to take a vacation there. So then I was actually able to go there through my consulting job. So I noticed that in some ways, it's like the things will naturally happen and you don't have to force the timing of them. Just looking at the chat here. Oh, the to-do list, I feel seen. Yeah, the to-do list is always going to be there. Yeah, and this can play out in really little ways. Like you might be the person who's always like 10 minutes late when you're supposed to meet somebody. It's just kind of the way it goes. Um, but this can also play out in like bigger ways, like you feel like you're running out of time in life to find your purpose, or you feel like you're running out of time in life to like fall in love. And so it's just kind of reminding yourself that that's like a trick, that that's not actually true. And so reminding yourself that like there's always time. Yeah, and I just heard somebody say that they have a defined root center and they kind of identify with this energy too. And yeah, and sometimes when you have a defined center, there might be a way that the energy just isn't like totally aligned for you right now. And so you can actually identify with some of these other ways of being. And I also had a client recently who said she grew up in a family where everyone had undefined roots, and she had a defined root, but it was almost like she was conditioned by the people around her to sort of operate from that shadow. And so she was like learning how to get in touch with more of this healthy way of like using the energy in her root center. Okay, and so now we come to the last center we haven't talked about yet today, which is the spleen. This is another really powerful one. And for some people, this is their way of making decisions. If your way is like listening to your intuition and making in the moment decisions. And the spleen, again, like I was saying, how something can be a strength, but it could also be a shadow. So the spleen is actually where that animalistic intuition lives. And the flip side of that is worry and fear. So you can actually, whereas the emotional center over here, you can sort of tune into other people's emotions. The spleen is where you can tap into and actually feel other people's fear or worries. So a really helpful question sometimes to ask yourself if you have an open spleen is, oh, is this something I'm actually afraid of? Like a silly example is maybe you grew up where, I don't know, your sister was afraid of spiders. And so you're always like, oh, I'm afraid of spiders too. But one day you're like, wait, I don't know, I'm actually not afraid of spiders. And so it was just kind of like you picked up somebody else's fear and you were sort of like carrying it as your own. So yeah, just really noticing, oh, am I afraid of this? Or is that actually somebody else's? And you can be very wise about what is healthy for you. And so kind of like trusting that you know intuitively what is healthy for you or what is not. Um, and one of the big shadows of this center is holding on to what isn't good for you. And part of this is if you think about the energy of like, a kid with a blanket when they're little, or sort of like the concept of a safety blanket. Um, that can make you feel really safe and secure. And so then it's almost like you don't have to feel fear or worry because you're like, oh, I'm really safe here. But, when you think about the energy of almost like keeping yourself in a similar place, sometimes that place can actually serve you and can actually help you grow. And then there can be a moment in time, kind of like a snake shedding its skin, where you're like, oh, this container now is actually preventing me from growing more. So it's kind of really tuning into maybe where in your life are you keeping things a certain way just because that's the way they've always been, and it's actually preventing you from growing and changing. Yeah, so a really great question is, am I doing it this way because it's the best way or because it's the way I've just always done it? So this is a little bit about each center, and I think this is like a great transition time now to look at the Q&A.
Awesome. Yeah, so much good information. I'm already looking forward to watching the replay back and diving a little bit deeper into all of these areas. So interesting, and I hope everyone else found it as interesting as I did. We have some great questions in the Q&A. If everyone wants to take a moment to just go in and upvote any that are relevant to them, so we can try to answer as many as possible with the time that we have left. The first one, Jess, is from Natalie. She says that you maybe already answered it a little bit, but I like this question a lot. So I'm hoping that you can maybe speak a little bit more to it. Natalie has an open G, and she's wondering about if you can speak into the feelings of feeling lost with the center in terms of career, purpose, and finding your tribe. And they've always felt this to be very difficult with an open G center.
Natalie, can I ask you to put in the chat, if I say to you, what is your profile? That's going to be two numbers, like a 6-2 or a 2-4. Would
She's
you
a
be
6-2,
okay?
a generator 6-2 emotional authority. She introduced herself at the beginning, so I saw it up
Okay.
there.
And okay, so can you speak into the feelings of feeling lost with this center in terms of career purpose and finding your tribe? And one more question, Natalie, are you under 30 or over 30?
She says over.
Okay. So I don't know if you're newly in your 30s, but the reason I was asking this is because when you have a 6 profile number, you live your life in 3 phases. And so in a way, it's actually really healthy for you a little bit to feel lost. I'm also a 6-2. And so think about your journey in life as you're like a fine wine and you keep getting better with age. And a really great example of this recently is if anybody's been following kind of like Pamela Anderson's journey, um, she has a 6 in her profile and she's over 50 now. And it's like she's gone through this whole transformation and is completely different than she was when she was younger. And so part of it is, when I was saying before, I think you said when I answered the question, is tuning back into, I think you said your emotional authority, maybe. And so really tuning into the way that you make decisions and letting that lead you, because you're not, when you're getting stuck in that question of like, where am I going or what is my purpose? It's like you get so fixated on it that you're actually like trying to make decisions from your open G center versus like letting that emotional authority guide you. And one of the things that can be really helpful for you is think about life as as going to different places and like getting a little taste. So I have a client with an open G center, and she's been exploring, where does she want to live next? And so she's been just kind of going to different places. And I mean, the whole concept of outsite is actually kind of perfect if you have an open G center, like going to different places and trying them out. And like, where do you feel kind of like most you? So that can be really helpful, is to just give yourself permission to try things out and like notice how you feel. And
Excellent.
almost a
Thank you.
little bit like, I feel like this sounds cliche, but almost like releasing the need to quote unquote figure it out. And can you like almost like shift your focus and enjoy like, oh, kind of what are the things I'm enjoying most now? Or what, and maybe um give yourself a little bit of the power back to you by looking at, are there any places in my life where I'm actually showing up in a really fixed way? And maybe that's actually getting in your way of meeting, kind of like finding your tribe. So sometimes
Awesome.
it's like you kind of shifting your own energy that then will help draw those people towards you.
That's a great perspective. And Natalie, I will include Jess's contact information in the post event materials in case you want to contact Jess to talk more in depth about this. And then we had the question
Yeah,
that
and I just want to say one more thing. Yeah, because
Mhm.
your specific channels too could be really helpful.
Yes. And then the question from Luli that we talked about a little bit earlier and decided to hold for the end. Does it make a difference when you have a defined center with multiple gates activated versus a defined center that is defined through just one gate?
Yeah, so the way I would think about this is if you think about kind of like plugs going into an outlet. So if you think about something that almost has like a lot of plugs, um, like a lot of wires coming off of it, there's so many opportunities for it to get plugged in. So if you have a defined center with a lot of gates, I would say that there's a lot of energy there. So this would actually be a really fun, something fun to look at too in a session, is sometimes when I look at somebody's chart, like I can see, oh, wow, they have like 5 gates coming out of their G center. Like they are meant to, whatever their work is in the world, they're really meant to like guide people and have this really clear sense of who they are, because there's so much energy like in that place. Um, so to answer your question, I think it kind of plays into the chart as a whole, but it's really just maybe a little bit of the difference of energy. And when you just have one gate, um, you could almost think about it as a funnel. It's like maybe everything is kind of just funneling through that one specific energy that you have.
Interesting. Thank you for sharing more about that. The next question we have is from Laura, and it is, do you have any tips on not getting absorbed by someone else's emotions when your emotion center is open? They find it difficult and they get thrown off by people's energy. They have a really hard time realizing when it's not theirs.
Mm. Okay. So, I will answer this question too from my own personal experience and journey. And I think one of the things that's helpful to start noticing is how much, I think it was Laura that asked this question.
Yes.
Laura, how much are you in your body? And when I say that, what I mean is, you could even think about this as like a pie chart. And so it's like, are you 30% in your body? Are you 60% in your body? So kind of, in my experience, what I noticed was I was, just through different patterns that I had, I would say I was like over functioning in the sense that when I walked into a room, I was picking up on, oh, that person's tired, this person's hungry. So what I noticed was I was like jumping out of my body and like almost like jumping into other people's experiences. So I had sort of, you could say like left the building in a way. And it's really hard to stay centered in yourself if you're sort of not present in your physical body. So one of my first tips would be to start being more aware of like how often are you in your body? And can you just start noticing like, oops, that friend was telling a story and I just like jumped into her experience and I'm thinking about what she could fix and what she could do. And then to also just notice in your own toolkit, do you, like for me, yoga is really helpful. Or I mentioned like going for a walk, because there's actually something, I'm gonna not say the scientific words right, but when you're like walking, it helps connect the two parts of your brain and can help you get back in your body. So actually noticing what types of maybe movement or meditation, what tools actually help you get present in your body. And it's going to almost like increase, I think, increase your ability to stay centered in yourself, because that's been my experience is just being more aware of my own being.
That's a great tip, and one that I can really use as well. Another question about having an open G center. Can being in the wrong physical location be detrimental if you have an open G center?
And being in the yes, I think is that in the I just wanted to look at the can
Yes, it
be
is
oh
in the
yeah,
chat
can
box.
being in the wrong location be really detrimental? I always found finding the right actual place to live tough. Yeah, I think this is a balance. So I think it's like noticing, oh, like there's certain places I really don't feel comfortable here. And so I think it's like kind of noticing to your own tendencies, and maybe you're somebody that hasn't typically spoken up or said, I don't want to be in this space. And so maybe that's the part of your journey you're on now is like uh being more aware of that and setting more boundaries with that. So it definitely can be detrimental. And then I think there's also the balance of, okay, if I'm in this certain workplace and I'm really not liking it here, I can get clear that I don't want to be here in the long term. And on my personal journey, or like what things can I do to sort of like brighten it up for myself and help it function a little bit better for me in this experience while I'm kind of in this space.
Oh, that's really helpful. Thank you. And we're just about at time now. So there is one more question, and I think this will kind of
Mm.
dovetail nicely into um, sharing how folks can connect with you. Ruth says, "Thank you for your great explanation. Are there any books that you can recommend to dive into?" They already have the one from Chet and Parkin. So maybe if
Yes.
you have any resources that you can recommend, and also let us know how we can contact you if we have further questions, which again, I'll also include in the post-event communication. But what do you think for resources if we wanted to learn more about this?
Yes, and I think we can probably put this too in the information you send out after. Ruth, this is such a
Mhm.
great question. And for some reason, I'm blanking on the author's name right now, but there's a book that this author wrote that I love, and it's all about understanding the centers. And it actually goes through each center in great detail through the perspective of having it opened or defined, and kind of talking about the different energies of both. There's like, I think, meditations, reflection questions. And so for some reason, yeah, the name is escaping me right now, but I think it's just called Understanding the Centers and Human Design. So probably even if you just put that into Google, it would come up. But I will give that info to Lindsay. If you're kind of really into reading about stuff, it's more in depth, but it could be really fun.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm seeing some people in the chat giving their thanks to you, Jess. I also thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to be here with us and connect with us and share all of this really helpful info. And thank you to everyone who came to the session, asked your questions, and kind of showed up to be in community today. I really appreciate that. My name is Lindsay. I am head of community and events
Ah,
at Outside. And yes, I think we have did we find the author?
Robin, yes, Robin Wynn. Sorry for interrupting. And she
No,
actually
no, no.
has she actually has a bunch of books. So yes. Thank you, Ruth.
Amazing. No, that's I'm glad that we were able to get the author before the end of the session. Thank you, Ruth, for sharing that. The author's name is Robin Wynn. You can see it in the chat. I'll include it in the post-event materials. I'd like to thank you all for coming. I'm Lindsay, head of community events from Outsite. If you have any questions about Outsite, which is a global network of co-living and co-working spaces, please feel free to reach out to me. I would be happy to answer any questions you have about that. And I hope to see you in another online event that we do. And I hope that we cross paths out there in the world somewhere soon. Thanks again, Jess. I hope everyone has a great
Um,
day.
yes, and Lindsay, I will just quickly say I'm going to include a discount for a session that Lindsay will send out in an email because some of the questions today were so awesome and so specific and would be so great to explore in a dialogue and session.
Excellent. Be on the lookout for those emails that will include the discount code and some links to some resources, as well as how to contact Jess. All right, everyone, have a great day. Take care. Have a great afternoon or evening wherever you are in the world. Bye now.